Hello, this is Dr. Anthony Delmond. We've spent a good amount of time discussing organizational structures. Now we're going to move on and discuss management's role in a business. Now, this is not a management course, but there are some things we need to discuss for any business-related course. Management has a responsibility to customers, its internal stakeholders, and society at large. Stakeholders include anyone who owns some interest in the business itself. Now there's a list of stakeholders that most textbooks provide. Those are customers, again those are external stakeholders, owners, managers, employees and suppliers, internal and external, the community, creditors. Why are creditors interested in how successful a business is? Well, obviously they want to get paid back, so management has a responsibility to those. And government, tax breaks, incentives, and so on. The primary role of managers in a business is to supervise. That's what we all think of when we think about managing. But their activities fall into certain categories. The first is planning. That is setting the long-run goals for a company and developing short-run strategies to meet those goals. This is the sort of ex ante, prior work that management does. Then organizing, so identifying and implementing most effective methods and efficient methods for running a business. Controlling, that's what we picture management doing, taking corrective action when the company and its employees get off track, disciplinary action, that sort of thing. And then leading and acting as a representative. When we think of a CEO, that upper level management, we think about leaders, acting as a representative of the company externally and making the decisions internally for the best interest of those internal stakeholders. Now, traditionally we outline 4 main responsibilities of a business. Most textbooks include the pyramid of responsibility, which can be a little confusing. We typically depict the most important responsibilities at the bottom, since they're foundational responsibilities, so economic responsibilities. Most important, obviously. A little bit less important is those legal responsibilities. They're the next tier. But again, from the bottom up, you can't miss your legal responsibilities. You need to make sure that everything you're doing is within the law. But the economic responsibilities are making sure. I should have explained that a little before moving forward. Economic responsibilities involve making sure the business is solvent, that it stays afloat, that you're being profitable. Legal responsibilities are that you are doing that in a legal way that's sustainable. Ethical responsibilities, the third most important. You want to make sure that the business is treating people well. This is something different from legal responsibilities. Legal responsibilities mean that you're following the law. Ethical responsibilities mean that you are doing what's right and not what's wrong. That doesn't necessarily mean legal versus illegal. There are a lot of choices that we make in life that are not strictly legal or illegal, but they're ethical. And then the least important is social responsibilities. Social responsibilities are things like providing for the welfare of people outside the company, Starbucks planting trees and so on. Now I think it makes more sense to look at this the other way, so we have a top-down approach. Most important, biggest block of this upside-down pyramid is the economic portion, and moving down to the social. So a business's main economic responsibilities, as I said, are keeping the doors open, making sure the business is profitable, valuable to the shareholders, and provides a product that people will purchase. If you don't satisfy that, the business probably won't stay running. You can get away with being not unprofitable for a couple of years, as long as you eventually become profitable. But if you never become profitable, you won't be able to stay in business. The secondary responsibility of a business is to do things in a law-abiding way. Laws and regulations define what's acceptable for a business. If businesses don't follow these, eventually their doors will be closed. They'll have to deal with lawsuits. Some of these are following labor standards, making sure that you are paying your workers. If you aren't providing health care, safety, all of that, you might be subject to different lawsuits. OSHA could come in. You need to meet emissions requirements, or you'll have the EPA on you. and adhering to tax laws and bookkeeping requirements. We'll talk a little bit about some of these in more detail later on. You need to honor contracts. If you say you're going to do something, you need to do it because you can be legally held to that. Now, most businesses will successfully satisfy both of these, the legal and economic responsibilities. If you want to be successful in the long run, you need to adhere to both. But a lot of businesses will cut corners on the legal requirements, at least in the short run before they get caught. Survivable sometimes. Maybe there's only fines for some minor legal violations, but eventually it will hurt your reputation as a business. The social responsibilities, we're skipping one. We're skipping ethical because we're going to come back to that and spend some time on it. These are called sometimes philanthropic or discretionary responsibilities. They're not necessary for a business, but they show that business is doing some societal marketing. They have an interest in providing for society at large. Now, more and more, we see that this helps promote businesses because people are more and more interested, but it's, again, the least vital. Spending some time and energy on this is becoming more important to long-run success, but you could still survive without doing this. And somewhere in between, we have the ethical responsibilities. This involves making ethical decisions, again, different from legal decisions, but you need to make decisions that are ethical both in the workplace and outside the workplace. So when you're dealing internally, you want to make sure that your workers are treated fairly. When you're dealing externally, you want to make sure that external stakeholders, customers, and businesses that you work with are going to be treated fairly. And before we can move forward, we really need to discuss what ethics are specifically. So what are ethics? Ethics involve the incorporation of one's morals into guidelines for behavior. What are morals? Well, your morals are your standards of behavior, your knowledge and feelings about what's right and wrong. So we develop a moral code, a knowledge of what's right and wrong, and then ethics are how we incorporate those into how we behave. So morals are the feelings, essentially, and ethics are the rules that we use, that we create from those feelings. Everyone has a different take on what's right and wrong. People's morals are different. And so our personal codes of ethics are individualized. My ethics might not be the same as anyone else in this class. However, for a business to behave ethically, there need to be some guidelines that are the same for everybody. So a business needs to define its own ethical code to make sure that everyone's following it, since they are individualized for each person. Business ethics is an applied form of ethics that particularly relates to how a business incorporates its morals into a business-specific ethical plan. So why is it important to discuss business ethics? Well, especially today, businesses are under constant scrutiny from stakeholders. If businesses violate cultural, societal norms, people are going to know pretty quickly. We've all seen videos of taken by people's cell phones with somebody being mistreated in the workplace, or a salesperson screaming at a customer. That is pretty transparent today. And those kinds of violations can be really costly because it shows that the business does not maybe respect its external stakeholders. So what businesses need to do is make sure that they have a standard that's put in place, an internal ethical code that people have to follow, so that they can show that they do care and they do fix those kinds of problems. So for outward-facing ethics violations, those are the ones that affect external stakeholders like customers, but not internal stakeholders necessarily. Businesses could lose their revenue streams. If you make a bunch of customers mad because you don't treat them fairly and don't provide the services you say you'll provide, you're not maybe honoring your contracts, then you'll lose those customers and your reputation will get, as we could say, smeared pretty quickly. People don't want to buy products from salespeople who've cheated them, or businesses that would employ salespeople that cheat them. For inward-facing ethics violations, those are the ones that affect employees. Businesses can lose efficiency. If there's a hostile work environment, if workers are not paid what they deserve to be paid, if they're not able to get time off, or the conditions in the shop are not safe, you end up with less happy workers, workers that aren't going to do their job to the highest of their ability. So this can have significant effects also on a business. And it's worth noting that today, these types of things are pretty transparent as well. When there's an environment where workers are treated poorly, somebody eventually will become a whistleblower, and the public will get wind of it, and it will have a negative effect on the external stakeholders as well. We saw with Nike years ago that Nike was mistreating its workers, not paying them enough. I think there were some child labor issues way back in the day, and when customers heard about that, they stopped buying Nike products for a while, and that really hurt the company back, I believe, in the 90s. All right, as far as ethical development, people develop over their lives their ethical codes, so to speak, internally. There are 3 levels of ethical development. Those are pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional or principled. I'll put them up here. Pre-conventional morality is when you are not really developed beyond fear of consequences. People who are in this level of ethical development, they avoid trouble by simply doing what won't get them in trouble. So when no one is watching, they're likely to follow no rules. The majority of us follow a conventional morality. About 60 to 80% of us, most psychologists say, live our daily lives according to this conventional morality. We follow the laws and the norms of society because we recognize that we live within a system. Without those norms and rules, the system would devolve into something less safe, so people conform. Post-conventional or principled morality, those are people who develop their own rules regardless of those societal norms and laws. So they don't care really how people perceive them. They care about doing what they feel is right regardless of the laws or consequences. Sometimes this is revolutionary, like Rosa Parks refusing to move to the back of the bus, but other times it can be dangerous, like a fascist leader chipping away from the norms and foundations of our society. So there is no one best way. Pre-conventional morality is a little bit riskier. If everybody were just doing things to get away with it, society would not be as comfortable. If everyone was principled, then it may be that all of our morality, all the ethical codes that we create on our own contradict with each other, and we end up with, again, an unsafe society. So conventional morality, we're all following the laws and doing what we've agreed as a group is the best. I usually like to ask here what category each person falls into, but obviously in an online class we can't get feedback. I'm going to go ahead and stop here, and when we come back we'll talk a little bit about how this works in a business.